Well, once again, being joined by James Guay, licensed marriage and family therapist out of Southern California. Thank you so much for taking time and chatting with us again.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
So, I want to talk about, it is Mental Health Awareness Month, right? It's still the
Right.
month of May. And so we're kind of winding down on this month, right?
Yeah.
And so many people are, they take this month serious. They want
Mhm.
to gauge their progress. They want to take their
Mm,
mental health seriously.
yeah.
So, how can you measure your
Mhm.
progress when it comes to your mental health?
I think it's important to not minimize the progress and look for any small minutia and really fully absorb that. So it may be things like better sleep, bouncing back from stress, setting boundaries where you might not have otherwise. It doesn't have to be like an aha moment or something that is pronounced or seemingly more significant. It's these small little steps. Maybe you're talking a little bit more kindly to yourself. Maybe there's a bit more space to choose differently than historically you've done, right? Any of these things can make a huge difference. And it's a bit like I'm going to use an analogy because I'm a hiker and backpacker. It's sort of like doing switchbacks instead of going straight to the summit. Oftentimes there's switchbacks that allows us steadier elevation gains so that we can withstand the trek forward. And it's by noticing that we may not be facing the summit, but we are still making progress, right? In those instances. And it's not linear. Sometimes we might dip down before we go back up, but we're still not at the trailhead. We're still further along the path. It's not like we're starting over when we regress to old patterns. We're just kind of remembering what it takes to do things differently.
That's a really good analogy. The switchbacks, if you will. Which I live in
Hmm.
Florida. We don't have many of those.
Yeah.
But I imagine the idea is the same here. And
Right.
also too, I think it's important. You kind of mentioned it. Sometimes you might have to go down before you go back up, or maybe
Right.
you are flat for a little while, and that's where you're catching your breath and you're taking moments to be like, you know what.
Hmm.
I'm gonna stay here for a minute so that we stay consistent and then keep going back up. I feel like that's okay too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's about maintaining progress or, and again, sometimes we revert to old ways of being, and that's just another, indicator, oh yeah, we need to get back on path and course correct and move forward. Like to maintain our peace, like if we've had symptom management and some relief, great. If we were just barely surviving and holding on, then any kind of relief from that is significant. And it doesn't have to be the final destination. We can also, keep at it and not just have symptom relief, not just, get away from the survival mentality, but also thriving and flourishing more, seeing like what kinds of relationships serve us best, how we show up in our own lives to allow us to live more fully, to enjoy life more than we've had before.
We're kind of dabbling with where I want to go next, and that is, are
Hmm.
there ways to kind of further that healing once you reach a place of peace? We've kind of touched on it, but I feel like you
Yeah.
sometimes feel like you've reached it, but
Hmm.
you're like, but maybe there's further to go. I mean, how do you get there, right?
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes we have to slow down to do more, instead of being on the treadmill and chasing the carrot on the stick and the moving goalpost that we never quite accomplish. It's sometimes like, okay, let me pause, let me absorb the nutrients of the progress I've already made, and then also determine, okay, what is meaningful and important for us to continue to work towards, right? So those could be different goals. It could be finding interests and activities or friendships, relationships that are more rewarding. It can be discerning, who zaps you of your energy or what things feel unnecessary and fine tuning some of those details so that we can work towards enjoying life more and not just simply surviving.
I think that's a really important point too. Not just surviving, right? Enjoying life. I think that
Yeah,
even throughout this process, that's still possible.
right.
Um, can mental health, progress, can it be
Hmm.
impeded or aided by attending, a Pride festival, say? Because Pride Month is right around the
Mm,
corner. And I know that
right.
sometimes maybe being in situations like that, especially if you're not comfortable with your sexuality,
Mhm.
um, that might have an impact on your mental health too.
And it can do both. It can have a positive impact and it can have a negative impact and it can just be neutral, depending on the context and where we're at. So for example, when I was 20 years old, newly sort of out or accepting of my sexuality, I went to my first Halloween parade party on Santa Monica Boulevard in West Hollywood. And for me, it was like, wow, I'm seeing other people just enjoy themselves in this moment. And it was sort of a mirror of what was possible for me. And so it was very, very helpful, right? But for others, it might be overstimulating or it might, conjure up the stereotypes that they beat themselves up with, or, it might just be too much. And it's okay to pace ourselves, right? Maybe you watch it on a live stream first, or maybe you plan to go 15 minutes and then exit, or maybe not this year, but next. It's like being radically honest with ourselves about what the likely outcome is, and maybe pushing our comfort zone a little bit, but still respecting where we're at, I think is important in all this.
You actually touched on something. I had a DM from somebody that was like, CJ, I would love for you to cover a topic on attending a Pride festival for someone like myself who's newly out, and how
Uh,
do I handle that? So you said it beautifully, I think, which to me is, watch it on a live stream, maybe
mhm.
surround yourself with friends and say, hey, let's try it. Show up. If it's 15 minutes, listen, you tried it, you experienced it, and maybe
Yeah.
next year it'll be different.
It's like anything, these events aren't like the panacea for all growth and progress, But I think how we approach it matters. So if we go into it open to exploring our natural reactions and giving it the best chance of success, then great, But it doesn't mean that we have to force it to be something that it's not for us. Just being with whatever material is and pivoting if we need to, whether that's exiting or staying longer or enjoying it in a different way or certain aspects of it. I've always enjoyed the Dykes on Bikes, the initial thing that always gets me emotional, hearing the engines roaring and everything. For others, it's going to be something different. It's all okay.
Well, and speaking of that, I think, again, kind of to bridge it all together, it is, Mental Health Awareness Month, and Pride Month
Mm,
is right around the corner. So, why
mm,
in particular is Mental Health Awareness Month so important for the LGBTQ community? Because oftentimes you'll see, mental health groups, you'll see, hospital groups, etc. You'll
yeah.
see them really emphasize the LGBTQ plus community. Why is that?
Yeah. Unfortunately, we have a disproportionate relationship with mental health. LGBTQ people experience far more depression and anxiety and substance abuse and those kinds of things, not because of our sexuality or gender identity, but because of the bias, prejudices, and discrimination from society at large. And that's a lot to contend with. So, highlighting our mental health and well-being is part of the picture that allows us to maybe have address public policy, have our politicians, support funding and opportunities for us that might not otherwise be there. But it also allows us to just acknowledge that it is difficult being LGBTQ in a society that doesn't appreciate and honor that all the time, and especially, that with this current administration and all the backlash that is happening as a result. So it's important to honor our mental health and well-being as another determiner of our enjoyment of life and being able to tackle stressors that come our way. And so this is a really useful time to do just that.
And it's almost therapeutic in a way, right? Like, you have Mental Health Awareness Month, you kind of
Right.
deal with mental health issues, but then maybe you have that like awakening going into Pride Month. And so
Mm,
maybe a
hmm
great progress checker, maybe like, kind of like we talked about
hmm
earlier with Pride festivals or Pride season in general, maybe not even the festival, to
Yeah.
embrace who we are, to love who we are, and to remember that, as long
hmm
as we love ourselves, that is really at the end of the day what matters most.
In some ways, I prefer pride being shifted to greater self-compassion,
Yeah.
better respect for others within and outside of our communities, and that we can grow and learn and heal together as a community. I love that messaging, and if that's what people mean by pride, I'm all for
I love it. Me too. Well,
it.
listen, Thank you so much for jumping on and chatting with us again. It's always a pleasure, James Guay. Hopefully talk to you real soon.
Sounds good. Take good care.